Hi, I'm Dr. Ozdemir. I'm an integrative pediatrician, and I'd like to speak to a general audience and interested in learning more about pathways to heal autism. I have been a pediatrician since 1996, and I have been practicing in Jacksonville since 1999. And my goal from this telesummit to spread the our common goal to heal autism, and spread this hope to international level audience. I have been trained by Dr. Andrew Weil in University of Arizona Center for Integrative Medicine, and I have been practicing integrative medicine since year 2010. For the last 4 years, my practice evolved around trying to find answers to chronic diseases and understand some of the diseases that we cannot find answers for our patient population. And autism comes on top of these disease group. And I am very hopeful and diving more into this autism world. And since year 2010, I embrace myself with the world's leading experts in this field, and I'd like to share what I learned. And I would like to name this talk and Learning Pathways to Autism Recovery, because we know and the epigenetic and genetic, environmental, and individual outcomes can lead us to healing if we embrace ourselves with the proper, better balanced environmental ecosystem. And I was in Seattle and preparing a talk at Bastyr University, and then I come across a PBS, I believe, a TV show, and I was just very impressed by this gentleman. And building a house and totally blind and without getting much help. And then it made me realize that neuroplasticity is an extreme passion in this gentleman's life. So then when we look into neuroplasticity at a level of auditory, visual, and kinesthetic pathways, and this is a perfect example of how the neurons are wired and fired up together. And then how we can bring those neurons to excellence for them to be able to function, what is expected of those neurons to function, and to bring it to the normal functional person. And then when we dive deeper into the understanding the neuroplasticity and the outcomes, what we expect a normal person to be part of a normal life in a functioning ecosystem and perform what is expected of them, and then look at this person's outcomes, and it all lies into the whole child systems. And when I learned more about the epigenetics, genetics, and the person and the outcomes, and since year 2012, I developed what makes a whole child diagram, which is my triad of a whole perfect child. It combines biomedical, neurosensory, and psychosocial pathways. So when we look at the biomedical systems, it involves a person's environment, sleep, habits, toxins, and thoughts, and also trauma. So where we expose these kind of environmental exposures in our life and couple that to epigenetic and genetic potential that we bring to this life, eventually goes down to neurosensory performance, and in the end, what we see in the social setting and psychosocial performance. To bring this to a perfection for a person, we need to embrace ourselves with the epigenetic and genetic environmental perfection. So this is, in my book, starts 2 to 3 years preconception. But since this topic pretty much addressing international level, and we are hoping to recover autism in many generations to come, we will more focus on what we have in terms of biomedical, maybe not perfect, and it is coming with the neurosensory, some imperfect outcomes, and a psychosocially not fully performing child. So when we dissect this down to the neurosensory, biomedical, and psychosocial interventions, and I'd like to address what really is required for a perfect biomedical environment, and we need to embrace our children with a good nutrition. So, and actually nutrition of topic could take over this whole presentation, but I'd like to give the highlights probably in the end of this presentation. And so I cannot think of a child biomedically performing if they are not sleeping well. And if they're in an environment with a lot of stress, cortisol release will also disrupt their biomedical outcomes. And then toxins from the environment will also disrupt the biomedical outcomes. And the thoughts of the children in an environment that they are just not really encouraged and energetically connected, and those will bring more stress, and the cortisol-related biomedical pathways will be affected. So when we look at the whole child, and we'd like to have a child with the normal ecosystem, it starts from nutrition, which is affecting their gut, where we carry most of our neurons. Once we embrace our gut with the well-balanced ecosystem, which I call them garbage trucks and gangsters. We don't want the bad bacteria. We want good nutrition, good fiber, and all the well-balanced bacteria in the gut for a child to have a normal habitat in the gut to be able to absorb their micronutrients. That's the beginning part of the biomedical systems. In this day and age, we are seeing epidemics of iron deficiency and zinc deficiency, and then micronutrient deficiencies in children, which is causing adverse outcomes, which is affecting these neurons not to express their functions fully, and then they are not doing their neurosensory functions in the neurological systems. And then the person host also epigenetically vulnerable due to some epigenetic mutations we bring from our parents. And very commonly addressed genetic mutations in the autism world, and it received a lot of attention within the last 10 years, is the folate and B12 pathways. Folate and B12 pathways, and also further got hindered by the MTHFR, methyl tetrahydrofolate reductase enzyme mutations, and then how this gene expresses itself. So having a normal nourished child with the normal gut and giving them enough folate and B12 and the micronutrients may not mean the micronutrients will express their full function in the body, because we have to first ingest them. Once we well balanced ingest all our fats and carbohydrates and proteins, we have to be able to absorb them. Once we're able to absorb them, we'll have to be able to use certain enzymes and a certain bacterial balance in our gut to be able to actually compete with our environment and ecosystem in the gut, that we can actually take full advantage of these nutrients before the gut microbiome gets ahead of us. And then after we absorb our nutrients, and then if the person doesn't have a genetic mutation to be able to process folate and B12, now earlier what I mentioned, MTHFR gene mutations, very commonly mentioned in the autism world, those children will be able to absorb and process with the proper enzymatic reactions. However, we are also running into background SNPs in the genetic differences of our absorption and expression of our certain nutrient contents. So within the last 2-3 years, with the couple of conferences and the public awareness and some blogs and websites, and methyl tetrahydrofolate enzyme mutation and the genetic expressions became a very common public knowledge. And I get probably 5 to 10 calls every single day, and people in common environments and not even autistic, and dealing with the chronic diseases, and they would like to treat their chronic conditions because they found out they've got some kind of a genetic mutation. I I think companies like 23andMe has done a good public service to bring public attention these mutation in background SNPs is affecting our genetic outcomes. Even if we eat local, regional, natural foods, and we have a normal enzymatic reactions in our digestive tract, a normal bacterial count, and after we absorb these nutrients, our genetic expression changes person to person. And this is bringing us to whole systems approach to disease management. So we need to understand individual differences before we can treat chronic diseases and then help people by understanding their individual needs. For the last 2 years, I have been extensively practicing epigenetic medicine for any chronic disease management. And I find it very fascinating because certain pathways is the answer when we are actually looking at the common outcomes of the disease processes. So, and I'm not going to get into details of these enzymatic pathways, SNPs, or the genetic or epigenetic mutations. However, it is very important to understand so we can actually explain more why we are seeing such a spectrum in autism and outcomes, why there are so many variations to person, and one size does not fit all. And that's why it is very important to understand the 3 systems of my whole child approach to autism pathways and its recovery. Once we understand the neurosensory, biomedical, and psychosocial interaction of the whole child, we will be able to tap into neuroplasticity of the child, and then we'll be able to use their individual differences in their epigenetic pathways, and we'll be able to partner and couple the biomedical approaches to each individual child. For example, if a child has certain biomedical obstacles, once we discover what those are, and we come up with a disease management plan individually for that child, and then address the biomedical need and understand the child's individual neurosensory status, which is, I'm grateful to my great friend and autism expert and RDI therapist, April Shalat. And in partnering biomedical with the neurosensory outcomes will give us a perfect psychosocial performance in today's society. If a person, let's say, zinc deficiency, and the zinc deficiency is addressed with the biomedical intervention, and then this is a cofactor in the enzymatic pathways of the genetic, epigenetic function of our cells. And then neurotransmitters could be better produced if we use certain biomedical interventions to produce maybe more dopamine to focus, maybe be able to break down more serotonin to be able to unwind. Maybe we'll be able to produce more melatonin to be able to sleep. And that person, once we understand their background SNPs and epigenetic obstacles in their genetic material, and partner this with the environmental, again, toxins, thoughts, and trauma, and the environmental other factors, all multifactorial environment, we'll be able to look at this individual person and we'll be able to empower them with what nature provided, with the perfect psychosocially balanced nurturing environment. And to be able to address individual needs in autistic children, we cannot be a reductionist, only look at the biomedical interventions and not address the individuality of the genetics, inherited energy, epigenetics, and what they're missing in today in their functional level of the cells. I will dive a little bit more into the cell level briefly because I'd like this talk to be for the general audience. But in the cell level, biomedical really has thousands of players, and they're all like a turning wheels all at the same time. And when we don't eat meat, we're not getting enough B12. When we don't eat our green vegetables, we're not getting enough folate. But if we have a perfectly functioning genetic step, it is called methyl tetrahydrofolate, we cannot take meat and the greens, turn them into their methyl donor state, which is going to create methionine to make maybe more melatonin so that that child can sleep. So, but if you don't understand the individual difference in the background, then it is very difficult even to use the biomedical pathways and individualize to that person. And this is the reason for many years, and when we had the very systematic intervention to autism recovery, we've learned from our experience that one size did not fit all. And then it was pretty much frustrating for many years, and not coming up with the certain guidelines, not being able to give people some kind of a checklist, and then we can come up with a certain magic portion of remedy. Because now it made us realize that these biomedical interventions has to be individualized to the person, to their epigenetic need, to their environmental need, and to their inherited energy and their family needs. So, in other words, we are now facing, according to last CDC report, 1 in every 68 child with autistic spectrum disease. And we just don't have a perfect answer or remedy in a quick answer. So, or light for parents, because we are pretty reductionist in our conventional traditional ways, and that we just got stuck in our old-fashioned ways that we would like to come up with a perfect checklist and a perfect answer for a box diagnosis. It is time to get out of the box and think about what is going to address the individual. And again, I'd like to re-emphasize my perfect child triangle. I thought this was my triangle when I met personally April 2 years ago. She was presenting the same triangle. We individually, without knowing each other's triangle, we were using the same model for many years. Without a perfect biomedical, neurosensory, and a psychosocial environment, we will not be able to have a perfectly functioning child. Again, we will not have a perfect, pretty much cookie cutter that we can fit into a box diagnosis, and we will not come up with the cookie cutter perfectly fitting to an individual person, but then we'll be able to apply the same diagnosis and the same remedy to across the board everybody. Because now we live in the 21st century medicine, and we need to get out of the box and think integrative fashion. We need to integrate these pathways of biomedical, neurosensory, and psychosocial, and now think we have a person in this ecosystem which is quite broken. And we need to address the environmental obstacles. We need to address the food chain obstacles. We have to address their environmental stress levels. We have to address their inherited energy and where the obstructions are. We need to address microbiome and how in the world for the last 20 years microbiome and epidemiology of the certain microbiome changed its pathways and how they actually interact with human microbiome. So we lost our gut bacteria. We lost our relationship with the environment. And unless we reconnect these epigenetic pathways and then create a perfect balanced ecosystem, we will not come up with the perfect answer for our children with special needs. And I mean, this is topic close to home, and it makes me personally hurt, but many years of looking for the answers, and I think at this point I am very hopeful. And I think it is a time to change one community at a time and make people more aware of their environment. And before they spray their pesticides and herbicides in their backyard, they need to have conscious decisions in how they kind of interact with their environment. And how many animals we're killing in a normal habitat to be able to take over the place. But the same thing is happening in our own body, and we are more microbiome, 7 trillion, than human. But if we lost that balance, being 7 trillion good, friendly bacteria versus bad gangsters, bad bacteria, we stop eating local, regional, high fiber content, nutrition valued food, and all of a sudden our friendly bacteria turn into gangsters. We don't have our fiber. They are like, I call them garbage trucks, to be able to wipe out the bad bacteria from intestinal lining so we can actually have the good bacteria come and be at peace with the ecosystem so we can actually digest our food. I'm not interested in really giving acid reflux medicine. I'm more interested in why there is an acid reflux in that environment. So once we are actually through our fight with the ecosystem and able to create a perfect balance in this world, and I think we will be able to have more answers to disease process and how we became more at peace with our own inner balance and our own ecosystem to be able to address nutrient and eat nutrient-dense food and be able to absorb and use those micronutrients to our advantage. Then, and I move from the biomedical approach to more now neurosensory. And this is the area April helps me more than anybody. But then we need to be at peace neurosensorily with our environment. And I will give you an example of VAC system. I call it VAC, Visual Auditory Kinesthetic. Visual auditory kinesthetic systems works together, and they create neurons, and all those neurons to perform visual auditory kinesthetic functions, they're wired up together and they're fired together. So then if we have disruption in these neurons, then that means that we cannot perform functions and we are imbalanced. Let's say we had a perfect magnesium intake, and magnesium relaxes the body and it puts the body in more, maybe I'm ready to meditate and unwind state. But we have to be able to absorb the magnesium from our gut. When we reduce our stomach acid, we will not be able to absorb magnesium. But there are so many food in our ecosystem and constantly interfering with our absorption of simple magnesium. But we cannot really produce the downer functions of the magnesium with our neurons, and unless we can actually absorb it. And again, neurosensorily, we'll be able to function more at balance if we can take the micronutrients and then do the neuronic functions. Now, neurosensory pathways have kinesthetic input, but if we can approach them peripherally with the RDI expert, we'll be able to actually externally send signals to our neurosensory system, and we'll be able to give the proper input, connect that person to external stimuli, and be able to make the neurons start communicate with each other. But imagine that now we have a spirochete and a neurolyme in our brain. Even we have an external stimuli coming to give the proper RDI or proper neurosensory intervention, if we have an obstruction in neuronic pathways, it could be simple neurolyme. Lyme-infected child, outcome looks like autistic. Then we won't be able to function and then bring most out of that neuron unless we remove the obstruction out of the way. That means that we have to interfere with the bacteria in our system in obstructing the outcomes. What are those bacteria that we dealt with over the last many years as we dealt with autistic spectrum disorder children when we intervened by using biomedical interventions? And we dealt with H. pylori, we dealt with C. diff, we dealt with gut dysbiosis, small bowel bacterial overgrowth, we dealt with parasites and protozoa, and we dealt with Lyme disease. But we have seen As we lost balance with our food chain, we also seen bacteria changes epidemiologic interaction with our humans. So then neurosensory interaction requires those obstructions to be removed from our systems. And then we can have the best psychosocial outcomes with a proper psychosocial intervention in a well-balanced and supportive family unit. In the systems of biomedical, neurosensory, and psychosocial whole child approach, it's all anchors on the biomedical systems. And biomedical model is based on disease care. The new paradigm is holistic, patient-centered, healing-focused, addressing the care of the whole person, mind, body, and spirit. Includes conventional and complementary care and prevention. I hope my biomedical, neurosensory, and psychosocial whole child approach wasn't too technical, and we will have enough time after this talk to take some questions for the general audience. I'll be more than happy to interact with this wonderful Telesummit community. When I started this practice, I dreamed a place that children would be looking forward to go to. We want to open up children's imagination to a new world of medicine. And when they come in here, they forget they're sick and they want to play in the cruise ship deck. This ship has taken the children to a new world, the world of integrative medicine.